We make menswear-inspired clothes for women, trans, and non-binary folks. Basically, we got tired of walking into the men's section saying we really like these styles, but they don't fit our bodies. And so in 2015, we decided that we were going to solve the problem.
You're listening to Customer Growth Sessions, presented by Intergrowth, where we talk through strategies to help up-and-coming e-commerce businesses bring in more customers. I'm your host, Pat Ahern. Let's jump in. All right, listeners, welcome back to the latest episode of Customer Growth Sessions. Today, I'm thrilled to have on Kelly Moffat, the COO and co-founder over at Kirrin Finch. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. Can you start out by giving us an overview? What is Kirrin Finch?
Yeah, so Kirrin Finch is an apparel brand. We make menswear-inspired clothes for women, trans, and non-binary folks. Basically, we got tired of walking into the men's section saying we really like these styles, but they don't fit our bodies. And so in 2015, we decided that we were going to solve the problem. So today we make everything from shirts to suits. And we've got a lot of folks for those kind of special events where they're getting married, want to present themselves in front of their friends and families, to everyday wear where they, need to go into the boardroom and give a presentation.
And I was going to say, it was so cool to me when we were talking to hear really about how you got started on Kickstarter and how you generated your first, I'll allow you to speak to it, but to call it first 30,000, 40,000 net sales, if I remember it correctly. But I'd love to hear a little more. How did you get started with Kickstarter? What drove some of that initial success?
Yeah. So I think in 2015, Kickstarter was by all means a different beast, right? It had shifted a little bit, but it was really for us a play to fund that kind of first production run, but also to make sure that we were gathering a marketing base that we could then come back to and talk to. So we used it really more as a marketing tool for all intensive purposes. What ultimately we were trying to do is gather emails, right? And also make sure that we were getting out the word so that there was a splash, right? When you're launching, you don't want to just have to be able to speak to a few people. You want to speak to a large group at a time, right? So you're kind of building that momentum. And so that was what that tool was for us.
To me, as we were talking before the recording, that was one of the big things that stood out to me, is that emphasis on building customer feedback, collecting, and really just talking to your customers so regularly. I want to get into that in a minute, but talk to us a little about the post-Kickstarter days. You and your business partner started out, you generated this initial surge of sales, you had a handful of email subscribers. Talk us through the next couple of years of the business.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that we are positioned to speak to our customers in a unique way because we are such a niche business. And so we're serving folks that often have not been able to find something. And so they really want us to be able to give what it is that they want. And so we do ourselves a service by giving them exactly what they want, right? Because then ultimately they're going to buy it. So for us, we use that Kickstarter. And then once we reached our goal, what we did was we set out surveys and asked for those people that had bought into basically the production run, which styles do you want? What sizes? And that allowed us to kind of get what is in fashion termed as like the bell curve, right? For sizing, right? Because before you really have done a bunch of production runs, you're not really sure, okay, what is it that your customer sizing is going to look like? What are the styles they want? And so we had made some decisions, right? To say, okay, these are like maybe the 10 different fabrics we were going to run, but it allowed us to really kind of be smart about how we were starting off. And so we basically ran that production run for those folks and then kind of added on about 40% so that we would then have inventory from there.
Now, talk to me a little more about that customer feedback element, because that was, as we were talking, that was one of the things that came up time and time again, was talking about that emphasis on talking to customers. You mentioned here, you set out to collect feedback about what sorts of sizing to actually go with. And I know that's become such a big theme of the business over time. So on a recurring basis, what are the types of questions you're asking customers? How do you go about collecting that feedback?
Yeah, I think no matter what kind of brand that you have, it's so imperative that you listen to your customers, right? And so ultimately it serves both of you. So one of the things that we have done in the past is, and consistently like on a year basis, we'll send out an annual customer survey. We'll give them a discount code, right? As a kind of an incentive. We don't run a lot of promos. So this is something that is a kind of splashy way to start the year. It also January, February, when they're that kind of change in seasons for retail brands, that's something that, it's a nice little boost to help get through inventory as well. That's something that's a little bit more formal. We've also spent a lot of time doing small, like maybe 5 to 6 or so customers, one-on-one customer groups. We also do a lot of just kind of Instagram polls, that kind of thing, where it doesn't need to be this like super formal way to capture customer information. It could just be, hey, these are the 4 types of blazers that we're looking to run next season. Which one would you vote for? And so one, we're getting their feedback, right? And we're ultimately trying to push through the product that makes the most sense, but also they're engaged in the process, right? And when folks are engaged in your design process and whatever it is that you're trying to build, if they feel a part of that mission, ultimately that's going to be successful for both of you.
Brilliant. And I love the way you put that, where it sounds like in the best way possible, it's not necessarily like even always the most structured process. It sounds like it's more of like an organic process of maybe a member of the team says, hey, why don't I put out an Instagram poll and see if I can get 50 people or 100 people to respond and share their feedback. That's so cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that there's a place for both, right? That informal and that formal. But I think sometimes, especially in the beginning, it feels like, oh, everything has to be perfect, right? And so there are times when it's really just like, all right, we'll put this together in 15 minutes. And then a good example, right? We were running 2 different, one was a end-on-end stripe linen suit and one was more of a pinstripe, and just put up those images, send out the poll, where it validates our design team, and then boom, okay, decision made, let's move on.
Now, when you mentioned rounding up a handful of customers, if I heard correctly, I think you said, maybe smaller groups, 4 or 5, maybe 6 people. What does that process look like? Is it getting everyone on a Zoom call? Is it inviting them into the office in person? Would love to learn more about that.
Yeah, so we've kind of explored different routes there. I think there's something really powerful about being in person for a focus group, absolutely. But I think also the way that society exists nowadays, right? The beauty is you can be over the ocean and I could be in New York and we can do this, right? So what we tend to do is look at them a little bit more geographically, right? Noticing that sometimes on the East Coast, there's different buying habits versus West Coast. In the US, we have a lot of our customers that sit in New York and California, right? Not surprisingly, right? We often have a lot of folks from big cities. That's kind of where that queer audience often gravitates toward. They feel more comfortable. So looking at also with weather, right? There's different buying patterns there. So just being able to kind of hone in on what it is that that group is looking for. And also one of the things that comes out of it is also the customer camaraderie, which is really kind of a powerful thing, right? This is a customer base that doesn't feel like their needs have been met by traditional fashion brands. And so for them, it's all of a sudden I'm in a space talking about these things with 4 other people that want the same things as me. And, obviously that's a broad generalization, but like on the bigger picture, right? One might want jeans, one might want a brown blazer, but they want that kind of style, right? And so I think that there's something about bringing your customers together as well, which can be a powerful tool. And so right now we've been in business for about 10 years. Our customer loyalties, we send it 68% right now. And so return customer, that's a pretty high number. And so it's something that I'm proud about. And I think it's because we have fostered those relationships over time. One of the other things is when we look to models and who we want to feature on our website, we use a lot of real folks that we have met through contacts, or I've met people on the subway or at a party. And so there's a reflection of who they are. And if you see yourself in a brand, really, truly, honestly, as opposed to, oh, you picked that picture so that, you checked off that box, right? That feels different. And so that's important, especially for our customer base.
Definitely. And I love that that's such like an organic element. I think back to, I joke that like every elementary school, middle school textbook, it felt like every single person in the sun had to be covered in every single photo. And it was so blatant that like, this is done really intentionally. This is not genuine, but I love how much of a focus that is for you.
Yeah. And right. Like, visibility is absolutely important, but making sure it's genuine is a very different feel.
And I just wanted to add in on the note of focus groups. What strikes me about that, I'm hearing that you're bringing in customers who are really passionate about the brand, really passionate about the products, coming to meet in person. And I would frankly just imagine it's really fun. Like I would imagine there's a lot of scenarios where customers have never met and they go into this event and they end up like grabbing a beer or grabbing a coffee afterwards and chatting and becoming friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we're looking at, as I was reading an article that Klaviyo put out yesterday about like the importance of omnichannel right now, right? And that's certainly how customers are kind of operating. But I think there's also the importance of real like interactions right now. Obviously, COVID is in a very different place, but there is still a lot of like systemic like trauma around this, people being shoved into a space where they were not interacting as much. And I think that is really, over time, we're going to see a lot more in that kind of bounce back of like, okay, how can we do this activation so our customers can really meet and talk to us and understand that? So looking at real life interactions, like maybe at a basketball game or at a store, right? So there's that. And then there's also like, how do we create those customer relationships between those? And I think that like you see the bounce back of loyalty programs are becoming kind of a little bit more back in fashion at the moment. So those types of things of like, thank you for being here. We appreciate you.
I wanted to dive into the focus group with one other follow-up question. So when, you're sitting down with a handful of customers, asking them really just about their views on the brand, what are opportunities for new products? Are there certain types of responses, I guess I would say, that you're looking for that cause your ears to perk up and say, I think we have something? Or how do you go about finding those key insights that you're really going to use for product development?
All right. So we can all agree, Field of Dreams was a great movie, but man, were those guys wrong. Just because you built it does not mean that they will come. Hey, this is Pat, the host of Customer Growth Sessions. Our agency, Intergrowth, has been helping e-commerce brands like Bella Bridesmaids, Brevity, and JS Dental to get more customers online since 2016. Interested in seeing how we'd help you? Head over to intergrowth.com/CGS to book a complimentary consultation with me. That's intergrowth.com/CGS. All right, back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about product development, but it's also about like an awareness of like, is our brand hitting the mark on like how we're speaking to them? One of the things that is really important for our community is language, right? So that's something that we have talked about, how we describe our brand right now and have historically is menswear-inspired, right? So is that something, right? Oftentimes in marketing, you don't want to say, oh, we're positioning ourselves against something, right? But for us, especially when we set out, it was really important that people understood what we were doing because we were kind of not first to market, but certainly on the earlier ends. And so for folks to understand that was needed. And then kind of 2 or 3 years ago, we came back to them and it was like, hey, does this still feel right from a language perspective? So ultimately it was a mixed bag and we could go down a big rabbit hole on whether, but the decision was to stick with it based on the conversations that we had with our customers. But so I think, yes, there's certainly like, hey, do you want to see this product? But it can be leveraged as a tool for much more than that. And I think ultimately, right, as a brand, that's sometimes more important than just like, oh, do you want to see a black shirt or a white shirt?
Great feedback. Well, and along those lines, so measuring customer sentiment, in my experience, is a really hard thing to do with like crystal clear certainty. I'd imagine there's a lot of kind of having like a gut feel based on this member of the team is leading social and they hear generally positive sentiment. But are there specific tools that you found are really helpful for you and the team to measure how people feel about the brand?
Sure. I mean, we use like actual kind of like survey tools in our survey, but I think it's also, there can be like the more informal of making sure, like, for example, we use Slack to communicate within our team using the tools that so many of the return platforms have now. And when there is customer feedback that seems particularly meaningful, it goes into customer feedback Slack channel. And so people on the team are getting real customer feedback in real time. And so like our production team can see that and say, I'm seeing this trend, right? Okay, we put out this product. People have now, like, we've seen, 5-10 returns in this specific size. Hey, maybe we're not getting the jump in the different sizes right here. Let's go back and reevaluate that with our production team.
Stepping away from, because I know I've been hitting you with a lot of questions about like surveys, customer feedback. Stepping back a little bit, let's talk just more broadly about community development, community nurturing, whatever term you want to use. I get the sense that email and social are huge parts of that, especially for the customers that aren't in the New York area. How do you go about nurturing that community? Are there specific strategies you found effective or strategies that you've maybe found are really ineffective for your space?
Yeah, email is definitely one of our biggest marketing channels. And like most e-com brands, that is a powerful tool, especially for a customer that's pretty far down the funnel. So one of the tools that we use is storytelling to connect folks to our brand from an emotional sense. We run a program called the Dapper Scouts, and it's really about how do we tell the stories for our customers that perhaps haven't like maybe worn a suit before, or it's a parent that's buying for a kid. And like, my kid just came out as trans, but I don't know like how to support them. Right. And in the most loving, supportive way, but like, what do I do? Right. Or how do I like style this or dress this? And so we interview these folks, we give them some Kirrin Finch clothing, and then we take images of them. We're dabbling in video, right? As we're seeing more and more demand on video for customers these days. And so it's really about telling those stories there. And we also run a program called the Real Weddings. So that's folks that have gotten married in often our Georgie, which is our kind of premium suit that Italian made, right? And that kind of special occasion offering. And so they'll submit all of their portfolio from their wedding, right? Of their wedding photographer, and they'll hand that over. And so that we can tell their story, right? So that a customer that is like, okay, like this is how I want to present myself. This is how I want to feel in front of all those folks that love and care about me. And they feel validated by seeing that and feeling that from others. And so we feel really lucky that folks entrust us with that and telling their story of their commitment to their partner and being able to share that special day with others.
I love that. On so many fronts, one with the wedding side of things, being able to have people to share their story there. But to your point about, on top of that, the Dapper Scouts, what an incredible resource for, let's say, like the advocates that just say like, hey, this person that I really love came out as trans, or they came out as bi. Like, have those resources in one convenient place that they can go to, which allows them to ask what they probably at times are embarrassed to ask. But as you said, come from a place of love, come from a place of, hey, I want to be the best support system I can for this person I care about. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I also just like from a brand perspective, right? Like, how do you get the most resources, right, for your brand? Because no matter how big or small of a brand you are, right, you have a finite amount of resources, right? And so how do you tap into the community that already exists, that like is motivated and wants to share their stories and their images with you? It's a powerful tool for a brand to be able to access those resources as well.
So on the social and email front, my assumption hearing this is that so much of your content would revolve around like really promoting what I would call like these two broad resources. Are there any other resources, or even just whether it's fun memes, whatever it may be, that you found you really love sharing, you're constantly sharing on social, and that really just are stuff that's loved by your community?
Yeah, one of the things that we also try and do a lot of is customer education. We've found that really works well for us. In an email format, it looks more like a guide, right? Like, hey, here's the 3 ways to style this, right? This suit, right? So it's giving them meaningful content. And I think that's something that's really important for marketers these days, right? Like, people don't want you to just constantly sell them something. They want to have value for what it is that you're telling them. I think that you're seeing a lot more text messages where it's like, like, sure, there's like the launch text message, but there's also like, here's like a useful tip for the day or something like that. And so I think people are evolving on how they use social, email, all marketing platforms.
Certainly. You're preaching to the choir over here. Our agency does content marketing and SEO. So we're all about create useful content for your audience, make it easily searchable online. When people are looking for that information, you're the one that pops up. You're the resource that customers go to. You're the one that builds the relationship with them. So I love hearing that you're doing that as well.
Yeah. And I think also one thing, a learning that we had, speaking about SEO, we had written a blog post, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, very early on, about, and had to do with a Mandarin collar shirt. So we were ranking super, super high for Mandarin collars, which was amazing, except it was bringing in all this traffic that actually wasn't looking for the type of offering that we were giving. And so they were coming to our site, which is awesome, but it was actually inflating really who we wanted to be there. And so there's this balance act of like, okay. And we had actually stopped making this like particular type of shirt. So people were coming, wanting that, weren't necessarily the people we wanted. And so making sure that also you're ranking in spaces that you really want to be ranking for. So being intentional with that.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And even right now in particular in the SEO community, there's so much discussion going on about that exact topic of how broad a focus can you actually take on with content? I come from a camp that says any sort of traffic you're getting, even if it's a degree, maybe 2 degrees removed, carries a lot of weight in terms of building your brand awareness, getting people to search you out again, time and time again. But exactly as you said, it's a balancing act. The last thing you want is if you get 10,000 people to your site a month, you don't want 99% of those people to be irrelevant traffic that are reading a blog article and never look up your brand again. That doesn't do anyone any favors.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's something that we struggled with also in IRL. We had kind of done a long-term experiment of like pop-ups and maybe at about year 4 and 5. And what we were finding is it was hard to kind of make sure that we were in a space that we were getting enough foot traffic for the specific customer base that we wanted to serve. And so it was like, okay, actually for us as a brand, this is not the right move. And we actually can reach a lot more people through targeted advertising and all across the world versus spending 6 hours at a pop-up show. We're better off putting ad dollars towards a Google ad.
Interesting. Well, I'm trying to think, Kelly. We've covered a lot of ground. I think stepping back, I'd love to just hear from you. I'll timestamp this. We're looking at very tail end of January at this point, 2025. What's in the line for Kirrin Finch, let's say in the next 12 months? Can you give us a sneak peek? Any upcoming products that are going to be launching? What are you most excited about this year?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I'm super excited about that we actually just launched this past fall is our Kirrin collection, which is a tuxedo, the kind of the premium of our premium product. So that has been really exciting. So watching that kind of come into wedding season as folks are starting to think about kind of February or so is when folks are thinking about, oh, our wedding's in June. So that's certainly a customer base that we do. And we've been playing a lot in knits. So as kind of a new exploration, actually the shirt, for those listening, they won't be able to see it, but I'm wearing a knit shirt right now, which is kind of a new adventure for us. So, I think that as a brand that makes more formal offerings, it's trying to figure out what is the sweet spot as folks have kind of gone into this athleisure space and you're starting to see chinos with drawstrings, right? Yes, I want to look professional, but I want to be comfortable, right? So it's finding this balance for folks. So being able to adapt your product. For example, we just came out with a product called our Scout suit, which is this everyday suit. It has what's called a flexi waistband inside. And so it allows you to kind of have those 2 inches. That is kind of, if you have kids, right? If you've seen how some of those pants can kind of grow with you, this is less about when you're actively growing in age and more in throughout the course of the day or weeks or months. January 5th or so is probably when we all need that flexi waistband the most. But so, being able to say, all right, here's this product offering. How do we make sure that it's nuanced for our customer and to keep it relevant with the current trends?
Well, once again, everyone, this is Kelly Moffat, the COO and co-founder over at Kirrin Finch. Kelly, thank you for coming on today.
Pat, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Customer Growth Sessions. If you found it helpful, subscribe and give us a review. It helps us to grow the show. Looking for more SEO guidance on how to grow your business? Contact us at intergrowth.com/estimator or email me directly. You can reach me at pat@intergrowth.com. That's all for today. We'll see you again soon.